You know, when you see a painting and you immediately want to know how it was made to try and absorb the artist's knowledge. Well, in this video, I'm going to be giving you exactly that. Showing and explaining every step of my typical painting process, walking you through it all. The messy sketch, the trials and errors, the ugly bits and everything else. All the way down to the final render. Let's get right into it. Often in my coloring videos, I start with a pretty clean sketch, but not today. My sketch is not clean, and that's alright because none of it will be left once I'm done. The sketch phase is still the most important though, and it's where I'll figure out the composition for the piece. I'm really not looking at details at this stage though, I'm just looking for a clear direction. Usually, I'll focus on the pose and like the camera angle and leave most of the details and like all the design elements for later. But this is an original character of mine, so I'm already kind of familiar with the design, which will just help speed things up a bit. And my sketch here is just to help guide me as I fill the lines with colors, but I'm not bound to it. So these first steps are all meant to be like super rough. Basically, I'm trying to get the best representation of the final illustration as soon as possible in the process, with as little effort as possible. Like I might or might not keep any of this, so I'm not spending too long on it. That's the idea. Now, the lighting always plays a huge part in my illustration. I think it's probably the most important part. So I'm trying to block that in as early as possible to see if what I had in mind actually works before I fully commit to rendering anything else further. So here I have the moon as my main light source and a campfire, you know, to balance out the colors with some warmth. And in a way, I see the painting in this stage as a sales pitch to myself. Like if I can make it work when it's this rough, then I get the motivation to keep going. So for the same reason, I like to block out the background relatively early since its light setup will be shared with the character, right? They're all in the same scene. I also find it more fun to paint a character on a background rather than on a white canvas or just like a plain color canvas. I don't know why, but I'm less likely to abandon the painting when I do that. So I do that. And here I'm going for a rugged landscape and some like rocky hills. Like she set up camp for the night while on some grand adventure. And it's the same character, by the way, like from my personal project, but maybe before she learned to control her cursed arm. So here I was imagining that it's maybe unstable, so she's rushing to bandage it more to contain its power, or she's removing her bandage because she's about to fight something. Who knows?
Prepare to meet your master.
Now, let me hit on my color choices real quick too, because how I choose colors might be quite a bit different than a lot of you might imagine. So generally speaking, I don't start with a color harmony like many artists do. I often don't bother with that at all.
I'm a very special boy.
And that might seem weird, right? Like, how do I choose colors then? Well, let me explain. So instead, I let the needs of the scene drive the color choices, for the most part. Like, I know this is going to be at night, right? If there's a full moon high in the sky. So my scene has a dark blue background almost like baked in from the start. Now, I'm painting an original character, so I'm just reusing her color scheme, which was a split complementary harmony between her light mint-colored hair and her berry red outfit. But just like I did for her outfit, all I'm doing really is trying to balance warm and cool colors. Like for her, all I started with was the color of her hair. Like I wanted her to have that hair color. So then it was just a matter of figuring out, well, what would pair well with that? Like what would offset the mint color? And usually I just tend to take the opposite color on the chromatic circle, or very close to that, which would be in theory the best, balance to that color. So balance between warm and cool colors. And the logic that I go by is to always try to have a little bit of one and a lot of the other, roughly in like a 1/3 to 2/3 ratio. Worrying about color harmonies can help for sure, if you're starting from scratch and you're really unsure where you're going with this, but I feel it's easier and maybe more natural to just balance warm and cool colors that way. As long as you do that, it'll probably turn out okay. And worth mentioning when playing with colors, the more contrast you have between the temperature of your colors, the more it attracts attention. So I just try to play with that. Like around her face with her bright mint colored hair and dark peach colored skin, well, it creates a good amount of contrast already. But an all blue background, well, doesn't feature much of that at all. So usually it won't be as eye-catching. And for the background, well, that's exactly what I would want. I want people to focus on the character, not the background. And creating a painting that reads well is all about that, managing the viewer's attention. So low contrast in low importance areas and high contrast around the focal points. And it's important to mention that contrasts come in many forms, like warm versus cool colors, like I've mentioned already, but also bright and dark values, maybe zones of high details versus zone of low details, movement versus stillness, or maybe even the rarity of certain elements versus others. And the list goes on and on. So like in my case here, I made the lower half of the painting pretty busy with the black magic effect. So the top half with less detail, well, stands out even more. Or at least that was my intention. Anyways, I think I can stop here for a minute. This right here is basically the blueprint for my painting. Like if we look at a thumbnail size version, that's basically what I plan the final image to look like. And all that's left, I mean, there's still a lot left to work on, but really most of it will be rendering, right? Like the bits that will make or break this painting are done at this point. If it looks crappy at this stage, usually more rendering is not gonna change it, so I'll usually trash it. It doesn't happen too often, but sometimes it does. And it's no big deal even if I trash it, because it's not like I've invested hours at this point. Maybe 1 hour at most. But if it looks good though, then I take it as motivation to go right into render mode, which I'll do next. Hopefully you're all following along so far, but if you're more of a beginner, like this might seem a little too much. And it is not a process that I would recommend to my students, until they have a strong foundation as artists. Like a full digital painting like this is what I cover in the final term of my art program for a reason. Like you need to learn a lot of things before this becomes possible. And of course, I teach all of that in
Art School for Digital Artists
that you can find on sale for our 9th anniversary until the end of the month. So only for a couple more days. Like I have a lot of stuff for free here on YouTube already, but if you want the best possible structure, video classes covering every topic you could possibly need, exercises, a week-by-week study guide for the entire program, and an awesome community of art students on Discord, check out the link to my art school program in the video description. There's still time before the sale expires. Don't miss out. Now it's time to move on to the rendering. Now I'm not going to be going into small details just yet though, so let's call this step level 1 render. Like I'm not worried about reflections, material properties, or special effects at this stage. Like my goal is just to iron out my lighting and volume shading and like clean up the messiness a little bit. And talking about that, you'll see as I work on this painting, I really have 3 main layers. The line art that I place on top of my stack with very low opacity so that it's just barely visible. I just use it as a guide and I'll collapse it with the other layers at some point. Then I'll have 1 layer for my character and another one for the background. And I have more layers than that, but I see them all as temporary layers where I try things until I finally decide to combine them with the main layers. Now I will say at the beginning, it's pretty useful to have different layers for lights and shadows as I was exploring different ideas, but later in the process during the rendering, we're way past that, so they get combined. I'm fully committed. And now is probably another good point to take a little pause. I've painted over everything with a little bit more detail, so now it's time for level 2 render. So what I have here at this point is everything looks like this boring matte material. So I'll need to go over everything else once more, adding things like reflections, material details, like a little bit of texture maybe, and just sharpening a lot of the details even more. This rendering step can take a bit of time, often as much as everything that I've done so far, sometimes even more than that, but it's super relaxing at least, so I'll just get a playlist going, like a nice little drink, and just spend hours, painting this stuff. In total, I think the whole painting took a little under 6 hours based on the recorded content that I have. And you can think of this render step as going from like 480p resolution, like a really crappy pixelated video, to like 720p maybe. So not HD yet, but much better quality. Like I'm slowly increasing the resolution. And you've probably seen me flip the canvas many times throughout the process, and that's just when I get bored of looking at the same thing. Flipping the image almost makes it feel like a new painting. And sometimes, as a bonus, it also highlights some problems that I haven't noticed looking at it from the same side for too long. Now, I will say though, at this point, I feel like this looks pretty cool, and that's about as far as I'll take that one today. When there's a lot of elements in a painting like this, like with a character, background elements, effects, dramatic lighting, it's like a big balancing act. Every time you change something, a few other things need balancing as a result, but as long as the direction was solid at the beginning, then it's hard to mess up. And this is the final result. All I see are problems that I want to fix, but I'll keep those to myself. The render quality is also a bit too rough for my taste, but I think I've kind of reached a point of diminishing return with this one, so it's right to stop. Even if I spent another 6 hours on this, like, I don't think that it would be meaningfully better. But with that said, there are things that I like too. I think the composition works really well. Like, I was trying this Christmas tree shape as a challenge, and I think it kind of works. I also like how I painted her hair, and I like all of these like rough brush strokes when I zoom in. It turned out pretty close to what I had in mind in my head at the beginning. Now, there's so many flaws, but I think it looks good if you don't stare at it for too long. Like if you see it on the phone screen where you can't see too much of the details anyway. Now, I'll admit that I found this angle to be pretty tricky to paint, but that's kind of the whole point of practicing, right? If it's too easy, you're not growing as an artist. Now, I know that I didn't talk about layers or like any of that kind of stuff because I have other classes that focus specifically on that, like on all sorts of coloring methods. But if that's something that you would be interested in checking out, well, first pay your class fee of either 1 like or 1 sub, and click the video that's gonna appear here in just a second. It's a full coloring class where I cover all the technical side in great detail. I'll see you over there. Come on, click that link, bro.